The containment field hummed with barely restrained energy as Lyra pressed her six-fingered hand against the observation window. Inside, the human infant, designation Arik, sat on the floor, stacking colored blocks with an unsettling degree of focus for something barely 2 cycles old. "It's learning spatial geometry," she whispered to her colleague, her secondary eyelids flickering with anxiety. "At 18 months. The Galactic Council had debated for weeks whether to allow humans to colonize beyond their quarantine system. They were apex predators, everyone knew that. Evolution had sculpted them in a crucible of megafauna and ice ages, leaving them with forward-facing eyes, persistence hunting instincts, and a disturbing tolerance for self-sacrifice. But they were also reasonable, diplomatic, curious. The adults were manageable. The children were something else entirely. Lyra had spent 3 years studying human development, and every report she filed made the Council more nervous. Human infants were born helpless, a liability by any civilized species standards, yet they possessed something that made her scales itch. Potential. Arik looked up at her then, his round face breaking into a smile. 2 teeth, barely able to walk, and yet his eyes held that peculiar human quality that had conquered Earth's food chain. Calculation. "Lyra," he said. Mangling her name in his infant vocal cords, she felt her cardiac muscle skip. Human babies learned language by 18 months. But language was just the beginning. They learned tool use by 2 years. Abstract reasoning by 3. By 5, they could understand death. By 10, they could question authority. By 15, they could overthrow it, and they learned by playing. The door hissed open behind her. Commander Vex, his crystalline carapace reflecting the sterile light, approached with his usual military precision. "The Council has made their decision," he said. "We're separating them." "Separating?" Lyra turned, her tail lashing. "From their parents? The humans have agreed. The adults will colonize Sector 7. The juveniles will be raised here, educated in galactic norms, civilized before they can become dangerous." Lyra looked back at Arik, who had returned to his blocks, now building what appeared to be a bridge. An arch. "At 18 months, you're making a mistake," she said quietly. "We're preventing one." The separation began at dawn cycle. Lyra watched from the observation deck as human parents said goodbye to their children, many of them weeping. Another peculiarity of their species, this liquid emotional release. Arik's father, a man named David Chen, held his son for a long moment, whispering something Lyra's translator couldn't catch. Then he set the boy down and walked away. Arik didn't cry. He watched his father leave, those calculating eyes tracking every step. Then he turned to Lyra and said something that made her blood chill. "Father, come back," 3 words, subject, verb, object, conditional understanding, cause and effect. At 18 months, 6 months passed. The human children were placed in specialized education pods, taught galactic history, mathematics, and civic duty. They learned faster than any species on record. They asked questions that made their tutors uncomfortable. They formed hierarchies, alliances, and occasionally rebellions. Arik was the worst of them. He didn't act out. He didn't throw tantrums. He simply had observed and learned, and waited. Lyra found him one evening in the recreation sphere, sitting alone while other children played. He was drawing on a data pad, crude stick figures that her neural analysis couldn't quite interpret. "What are you making?" she asked, settling beside him. He looked up at her. 2 years old now. "Father," he said simply. The image wasn't just a stick figure. It showed a human, arms outstretched, surrounded by smaller humans, a family unit, a pack structure. "Your father is safe," Lyra said gently. "He's on the colony world, happy." "No," Arik's voice was certain. "Father, sad," I said. "Others sad." Lyra felt something crack in her chest. Humans bonded. It was their evolutionary strategy. Pack hunting, communal child-rearing, emotional interdependence. The Council had tried to suppress instinct with education. They'd forgotten that humans were apex predators because they felt. "Arik," she said carefully, "if you could see your father again, what would you do?" He didn't hesitate. "Go home." 2 words that contained a universe of meaning. Home, not the station, not the education pods, not the galactic civilization they were trying to integrate him into. Home meant pack, meant family, meant the irrational, inefficient, beautiful chaos of human love. Lyra made her decision. The council emergency session was chaos. Lyra stood at the center, Arik beside her, as 100 species shouted in 100 languages, "You've violated protocol. The human juvenile is unsecured. This is an act of treason." Lyra raised her voice above the din. "You wanted to study them, to understand what makes humans dangerous. I'll tell you. It's not their teeth or their tools or their stubbornness." She placed her hand on Arik's shoulder. "It's that they never stop fighting for each other." Arik stepped forward then, this tiny human barely reaching Lyra's waist, and looked up at the assembled might of galactic civilization. "Father," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the translation matrix to every species present. Then he added 2 more words that changed everything. "I wait." The chamber fell silent, because everyone understood suddenly what Lyra had been trying to tell them. Human children weren't dangerous because they learned quickly or adapted efficiently. They were dangerous because they loved absolutely, and they would wait, years, decades, lifetimes, for the people they loved. They would never stop waiting. They would never stop fighting. They would never surrender their pack. Commander Vex's carapace dimmed. "Reunite them," he said quietly. "All of them." 3 days later, Lyra watched Arik run across the landing platform into his father's arms. David Chen swept his son up, tears streaming down his face, while Arik repeated a single word over and over. "Father, father, father." Lyra smiled, her scales finally settling. The galaxy would have to make room for humanity on their own terms, because the apex predators weren't coming to conquer. They were coming home.